it touched the red mesas and pine-covered mountains of Apache country, a lone figure was already moving silently through the wilderness. His footsteps made almost no sound against the earth, and even the deer grazing in the valleys rarely sensed his presence until he had already passed. The people of the tribe called him Taza, a hunter whose eyes could read the land like others read stories carved into stone. A lone figure was a broken twig, a faint footprint in dry soil, or a feather caught on a thorn bush told him everything he needed to know. Elders often said that Taza had been born with the spirit of the eagle and the patience of the wolf. Young boys dreamed of becoming hunters like him, while experienced warriors sought his guidance before long journeys. Yet despite the respect he earned, Taza lived alone. His lodge stood at the edge of the Apache camp, where the trees grew thicker and the sounds of laughter faded with the evening wind. While other families gathered around their fires to share stories, songs, and meals, Taza usually sat by himself, repairing his bow, sharpening his arrows, or staring quietly into the dancing flames. Many believed he preferred solitude. Only a handful of tribal elders knew the real reason. Years earlier, when Taza was still a young man full of hope, tragedy had changed everything. During a season of conflict between rival groups, his family had been caught in the violence. His father, a respected warrior, had fallen defending the camp. His mother and younger sister had not survived the chaos that followed. When the smoke cleared, Taza returned from a hunting trip to find the home he had known reduced to ashes and silence. The pain settled deep inside him like a stone that could never be lifted. From that day forward, he spoke little. He buried his grief beneath endless work, believing that if his hands remained busy, his heart would not have time to remember. Instead of joining celebrations, he volunteered for dangerous hunts. Instead of sitting beside the evening fires, he wandered the forests beneath the stars. Instead of dreaming about a family of his own, he convinced himself that such dreams belonged to other men. As the seasons passed, Taza became one of the tribe's greatest hunters. He never returned from the mountains empty-handed. Even during harsh winters, when food became scarce, he somehow managed to find elk, rabbits, or wild turkeys to feed the people. But he never claimed credit. If an elder's food supply ran low, a bundle of fresh meat would quietly appear outside the lodge before sunrise. If a widow struggled to gather firewood, someone would leave neatly stacked logs beside her doorway during the night. Children who lost arrows while practicing often found new ones waiting for them the next morning, carefully crafted with smooth shafts and perfectly balanced feathers. Everyone suspected Taza was responsible. No one ever saw him do it. When people thanked him, he simply nodded once and changed the subject. The chief admired his humility, while the medicine woman often smiled knowingly. A quiet river, she once told the children, can carry the deepest water. As years passed, many families encouraged their daughters to notice Taza. He was brave, dependable, and respected by every warrior in the camp. Though he owned little, everyone knew he possessed qualities that mattered far more than wealth. Several young women tried speaking with him during festivals. Some offered him handmade blankets. Others invited him to join dances held beneath the full moon. Taza politely thanked each of them, but his answer was always the same. "My path is different." Eventually, the invitations stopped. People assumed he had no interest in marriage. Some whispered that grief had frozen his heart forever. Taza never corrected them. The truth was much simpler, and much sadder. He believed he had nothing left to offer another person. Whenever he watched husbands laughing beside their wives or fathers teaching their children to ride horses, he felt happiness for them, but also a quiet fear. He had already lost everyone he loved once. The thought of building another family only to lose them again seemed unbearable. Better to walk alone than to risk that pain a second time. So he accepted loneliness as though it were another season of life. One crisp autumn evening, after returning from a successful hunt, Taza climbed a rocky hill overlooking the valley. Below him, smoke curled gently from dozens of lodges as families prepared their evening meals. Children's laughter echoed across the camp, mingling with the distant beat of ceremonial drums. He watched from afar, hidden among the tall pines. For a brief moment, he wondered what it might feel like to have someone waiting for him beside a warm fire. Someone who would smile when he returned home. The thought disappeared as quickly as it came. He lowered his eyes, adjusted the bundle of firewood on his shoulder, and quietly made his way back to his lonely lodge beneath the fading light. He did not know that before another season had passed, the peaceful life he had carefully built around his loneliness would change forever. Spring arrived gently across the Apache homeland, covering the valleys with wildflowers and filling the rivers with clear mountain water. The harsh winds of winter had faded, replaced by warm days filled with birdsong and the scent of pine drifting through the air. It was a season of renewal, when old wounds seemed easier to bear and new beginnings quietly took root. For Taza, however, little changed. He still rose before dawn, shouldered his bow, and disappeared into the forests while most of the camp was asleep. He hunted, gathered food, repaired tools, and returned only after the sun dipped below the mountains. Though the seasons changed around him, the walls he had built around his heart remained firmly in place. One afternoon, as he returned from a hunt carrying a freshly dressed deer across his shoulders, he noticed something unusual. The village was unusually busy. Women decorated the central gathering place with woven blankets and bright feathers. Children ran excitedly between the lodges, carrying baskets of flowers. Warriors polished their weapons and wore their finest buckskin clothing, while elders gathered in small groups, speaking in low, serious voices. Something important was happening. Taza quietly delivered the meat to the families who needed it most before making his way toward the council fire. Before he could ask anyone what was taking place, the chief's trusted messenger approached him. "The chief wishes to see you," the man said respectfully. Taza nodded and followed without another word. Inside the chief's large lodge, several respected elders sat in a circle. Their faces were calm but thoughtful. Standing near the entrance was the medicine woman, her silver-streaked hair braided neatly as she watched Taza with gentle eyes. The chief motioned for him to sit. "Taza," the chief began, "you have served our people faithfully for many years." Taza lowered his head. "I have only done my duty." "And you have done it without asking for honor or reward," another elder added. The chief continued. "A neighboring Apache band has traveled many days to meet with us. For years, both our peoples have shared hunting grounds, traded supplies, and stood together against common enemies. Now they seek to strengthen that peace with a marriage between our clans." Taza listened quietly, unsure why he had been called. Then the chief looked directly into his eyes. "They have chosen you." For several long moments, Taza said nothing. Surely he had misunderstood. "There must be some mistake," he finally replied. "There is no mistake." The chief smiled faintly. "They asked for a man known not for wealth or boasting, but for honor." Taza felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. "I am not the right man." The medicine woman spoke softly. "Perhaps that is exactly why you are." Before Taza could answer, voices outside announced the arrival of the neighboring delegation. The lodge flap opened. Several respected visitors entered first, followed by a young woman whose presence seemed to brighten the entire room. Her name was Ayana. She walked with quiet confidence, dressed in beautifully crafted buckskin embroidered with delicate beadwork that reflected the afternoon sunlight. Her long black hair fell over one shoulder in a single braid decorated with turquoise stones. Her dark eyes were calm and intelligent, carrying kindness instead of pride. She was breathtaking. Not merely because of her beauty, but because she carried herself with remarkable grace and humility. The room fell silent. Taza forgot to breathe. He had spent years convincing himself that marriage was never meant for him. Now he found himself standing before a woman who seemed as radiant as the sunrise over the mountains. His first thought was simple. She belongs with someone else. A brave war leader. A famous horseman. A chief's son. Anyone but me. Unable to stop himself, he quietly shook his head. There has been a mistake. Everyone looked toward him. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You're far too beautiful for me." The words escaped before he could pull them back. Several warriors exchanged surprised glances. One elder hid a smile. Ayana looked at him for a long moment. Then, instead of appearing offended, she laughed softly, a warm, genuine laugh that carried no mockery. "You are the first man who has greeted me with an apology instead of trying to impress me," she said. Taza immediately lowered his eyes. "I meant no disrespect." "I know." Her smile grew even warmer. "And I don't believe there has been any mistake." The elders quietly watched the exchange with satisfaction. Unlike many warriors who would have boasted about their hunting skills or victories in battle, Taza had spoken with complete honesty. His humility revealed far more about his character than any proud speech ever could. Over the following days, according to Apache custom, the two families spent time together so the couple could become acquainted before the marriage ceremony. Taza remained painfully awkward. Whenever Ayana spoke to him, he answered politely but briefly. He feared saying the wrong thing. He worried she would soon realize how ordinary he was compared with the stories others told about him. Yet Ayana seemed completely at ease. She asked about the mountains he hunted in, the animals he tracked, and the stars he used to guide himself at night. Instead of growing bored with his quiet answers, she listened carefully, as though every word mattered. One evening they walked beside a small stream beyond the camp. "You spend much of your life alone," Ayana observed. "Yes. Doesn't it become lonely?" Taza looked toward the flowing water. "Sometimes." "Then why choose it?" He was silent for several moments before answering. "Because when you expect nothing, nothing can be taken from you." Ayana understood there was pain behind those words, even if he never explained it. She did not press him for answers. Instead, she simply walked beside him in comfortable silence. For the first time in many years, Taza discovered that being quiet no longer felt like being alone. Neither of them realized it yet, but the journey they had begun was not one arranged only by their families. It was the first step toward healing two hearts that had been shaped by very different kinds of loneliness. The wedding took place beneath a clear blue sky, where the warm spring sun bathed the valley in golden light. Members of both Apache bands gathered in the center of the camp, dressed in their finest buckskin clothing decorated with intricate beadwork and feathers. Elders offered blessings, children scattered wildflowers across the ground, and the steady beat of ceremonial drums echoed through the surrounding hills. It was not a grand celebration filled with extravagant displays. Like many Apache traditions, it was simple, meaningful, and centered on family, community, and mutual respect. When the ceremony ended, Taza and Ayana stood together as husband and wife. Taza still struggled to believe it. As congratulations poured in from friends and elders, he felt as though everyone expected someone stronger, wiser, or more charming to be standing beside Ayana. Every time he glanced at her, radiant in the afternoon sunlight, the same thought echoed through his mind. She deserves someone better. Ayana noticed his uneasiness but said nothing. She had already learned that Taza spoke very little, yet his silence often revealed more than words ever could. That evening, according to tradition, Taza led his new wife to the lodge that had been his home for many years. The moment Ayana stepped inside, she paused. The lodge was clean, but painfully empty. A single sleeping area rested against one wall. Hunting bows, arrows, and spears were arranged with perfect care. Bundles of dried herbs hung from wooden poles near the roof. A cooking pot sat beside the fire pit, along with only a few wooden bowls and cups. There were no colorful blankets. No decorations. No woven baskets filled with keepsakes. No laughter lingering in its walls. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a place where someone merely survived. Taza lowered his eyes. "I know it isn't much." Ayana slowly walked around the lodge, gently touching the smooth wooden shelves and carefully repaired tools. "It tells me who you are," she replied softly. He looked confused. You take care of what you have. She smiled. And now we'll build the rest together. Those simple words settled quietly in Taza's heart. Over the following weeks, Ayana never tried to change who her husband was. Instead, she added warmth to the life he had forgotten was possible. She wove colorful blankets from soft wool. She placed wildflowers in clay jars near the entrance. She painted simple patterns on storage baskets and arranged herbs so their pleasant scent filled the lodge. Little by little, the lonely shelter became a welcoming home. When Taza returned from hunting each evening, something new greeted him, a fresh meal cooking over the fire, laughter instead of silence, or Ayana humming softly as she worked. At first, he hardly knew how to respond. He often stood awkwardly at the entrance, unsure whether he truly belonged there. One evening, Ayana laughed as she watched him hesitate outside. You know, she teased gently, husbands are allowed to come inside their own homes. Taza rubbed the back of his neck. I was making sure I wasn't interrupting. She smiled warmly. You never interrupt. For the first time in years, Taza found himself smiling without realizing it. As the days passed, Ayana began discovering the man hidden beneath his quiet nature. One morning, she awoke before sunrise and noticed Taza slipping quietly out of the lodge carrying several bundles wrapped in cloth. Curious, she followed at a distance. She watched as he stopped outside the lodge of an elderly widow whose legs had grown too weak for hunting or gathering. Without making a sound, he placed fresh venison beside her doorway along with dry firewood. Before the woman opened her door, Taza had already disappeared into the trees. Later that day, he repaired a broken bough belonging to a young boy whose father had died years earlier. The child never learned who had fixed it. On another afternoon, Ayana found Taza kneeling beside an injured hawk whose wing had become tangled in thorn bushes. With remarkable patience, he carefully freed the frightened bird, cleaned its wound, and waited until it flew safely back into the sky. He never expected anyone to witness these acts. He simply believed they were the right things to do. That evening, as they shared dinner beside the fire, Ayana quietly asked, "Why don't you tell people about the good you do?" Taza looked puzzled. "Why would I? So they know who helped them." He gently shook his head. "If someone is hungry, the food matters more than the hunter." His answer lingered in Ayana's thoughts long after the conversation ended. She had met many respected warriors before coming to this village. Some proudly displayed trophies from great hunts. Others enjoyed reminding everyone of victories in battle. Taza was different. He measured success not by praise received, but by lives quietly made better. The more she observed him, the more deeply she admired him. One afternoon, several children gathered near the edge of the camp, trying unsuccessfully to shoot arrows at a distant tree stump. Their arrows landed everywhere except the target. The children groaned in frustration. Without saying a word, Taza walked over. He adjusted one boy's stance. He showed another girl how to relax her shoulders before releasing the bowstring. He encouraged the smallest child to breathe slowly rather than rushing each shot. Within minutes, arrows began striking the target. The children's excited laughter echoed through the valley. As they celebrated, Taza quietly picked up his hunting pack and walked away before anyone could thank him. Watching from nearby, Ayana smiled to herself. The villagers often called her husband a loner. They were only half right. He did not avoid people because he disliked them. He stayed in the background because he believed others deserved the attention more than he did. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Taza and Ayana sat together outside their lodge. Orange light stretched across the valley while smoke curled gently upward from dozens of evening fires. After a long silence, Taza finally spoke. "I've been wondering something." "What is it?" Ayana asked. "Aren't you disappointed?" She looked at him with surprise. "About what?" "You could have married someone with a larger family, someone wealthier, someone who enjoys celebrations." He hesitated before finishing. someone who smiles more. Ayana reached over and gently placed her hand over his. Taza. He looked at her. I didn't marry a lodge. She smiled. I didn't marry fine blankets or beautiful horses. Her eyes met his steadily. I married a man whose heart is kinder than anyone I've ever known. Taza felt his throat tighten. No one had ever described him that way. For years, he had believed people respected him only because he was useful. Ayana saw something entirely different. For the first time since losing his family, a small crack appeared in the wall he had built around his heart. He still believed he was unworthy of such love. But now, for the first time, he quietly hoped he might learn to deserve it. Neither of them knew that before summer ended, their growing happiness would face a trial greater than either had imagined, one that would reveal just how strong their bond had truly become. By the time summer gave way to autumn, the forests surrounding the Apache camps had begun to change. The leaves on the cottonwood trees turned brilliant shades of gold, and the cool morning air carried the promise of another long winter. Families worked together to dry meat, gather acorns, store herbs, and prepare firewood for the cold months ahead. For Taza and Ayana, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Each morning, Taza disappeared into the mountains with his bow slung across his shoulder, while Ayana helped care for the elders, taught the younger girls traditional crafts, and assisted the medicine woman in gathering healing plants. Every evening, they met again beside the fire in their small lodge, sharing simple meals and quiet conversations. Taza still wasn't a man of many words, but Ayana no longer needed them. She had learned to read the slight smile that appeared when he was happy, the thoughtful silence that meant he was worried, and the protective glance he gave her whenever they walked through the forest together. Little by little, they had become partners in every sense of the word. But peace, the elders often said, was as delicate as frost on morning grass. One evening, as the sun dipped below the western hills, a group of Apache scouts rode into the village much faster than usual. Their horses were covered in dust, and their faces were grim. The sound of the warning horn echoed across the valley. Within moments, every warrior gathered near the council fire. Women ushered children into the safety of the lodges, while elders spoke quietly among themselves. Taza joined the circle, his expression calm but alert. The lead scout stepped forward. We found fresh tracks 2 days north of the river, he reported. How many? The chief asked. At least 30 riders. A murmur spread through the gathering. They're moving south, another scout added. If they continue, they'll reach our hunting grounds within a few days. The chief frowned. No one knows whether they come to trade, or to fight. Silence settled over the council. Then the chief looked toward Taza. There is one man I trust to learn the truth. Taza understood immediately. He bowed his head. I'll leave before sunrise. That night, Ayana helped him prepare for the journey. She packed dried meat, filled his water pouch, and carefully wrapped medicinal herbs in soft leather. Neither of them spoke much. The silence between them carried all the words they could not bring themselves to say. Just before dawn, Taza adjusted the strap of his bow and turned toward the lodge entrance. Ayana gently touched his arm. Come back to me. He looked into her eyes. I will do everything I can. She smiled bravely, though worry lingered behind her calm expression. I know. With that, he disappeared into the fading darkness. For 3 days, Taza followed the stranger's trail across rocky hills and narrow canyons. He moved with the patience of a wolf, never allowing himself to be seen. From hidden ridges, he watched the riders below. They were not traitors. Their weapons were ready, their horses heavily loaded, and their scouts searched carefully along every trail. Taza's heart sank. If they reached the Apache villages without warning, many innocent lives could be lost. As night fell, he quietly slipped away and began the long journey home. He traveled without stopping, crossing rivers and climbing steep mountain paths beneath the moonlight. By sunrise, he reached the village. The chief listened carefully as Taza explained everything he had seen. "We don't have much time," Taza concluded. The chief nodded. "Then we prepare." Throughout the day, the entire village worked together. Warriors strengthened defensive positions along the hills. Young men gathered extra arrows. The elders helped move children and supplies to safer ground. Ayana worked tirelessly beside the medicine man. She organized healing herbs, prepared bandages from clean cloth, and filled baskets with fresh water. When frightened children cried, she comforted them with gentle stories. When anxious mothers began to panic, she reminded them to stay strong. One elderly woman squeezed Ayana's hand. "You speak as calmly as your husband hunts." Ayana smiled softly. "We both do what we can." 2 mornings later, the warning came. The distant sound of horses echoed through the valley. Warriors rushed to their positions. Taza stood near the front, his bow already in his hands. The strangers appeared along the ridge just as the morning mist began to lift. For a tense moment, neither side moved. Then one of the hostile riders charged. The valley erupted into flames. Arrows flew through the air. Warriors shouted instructions. Horses thundered across the rocky ground. Taza remained astonishingly calm. Years of hunting had sharpened not only his aim but also his patience. He never wasted an arrow. Each shot protected a fellow warrior or forced the attackers to retreat. The battle stretched on through the night. Though the Apache defenders held their ground, several people were injured. Inside the village, Ayana and the medicine woman worked without rest. They cleaned wounds, stopped bleeding, and encouraged exhausted fighters returning from the front lines. Then disaster struck. A frightened horse, separated from its rider, bolted straight through the village. Its wild movements knocked over several storage baskets, sending frightened children running in every direction. One small boy stumbled and fell just beyond the safety of the lodges. Before anyone could reach him, 2 enemy riders spotted the child and changed direction. Ayana saw them. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the frightened boy. She grabbed his arm just as one of the riders raised a spear. "Taza," someone shouted. From across the battlefield, Taza turned. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. He saw Ayana shielding the child with her own body. He saw the riders closing in. Without thinking, he ran. He moved faster than anyone believed possible. His first arrow struck the lead rider's weapon, knocking it harmlessly aside. His second arrow startled the attacking horse, forcing it to rear away. The remaining rider turned toward Taza, but before he could attack, several Apache warriors rushed forward to help. Within moments, the danger had passed. Breathing heavily, Taza reached Ayana. She was still holding the frightened child tightly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice shaking for perhaps the first time in years. She looked up at him. "I'm all right." Only then did Taza notice a long scratch across her arm where the spear had grazed her. It was not serious. But seeing even that small injury filled him with more fear than facing an entire band of warriors. Without caring who was watching, he gently took her hands in his. For the first time since they had married, the walls around his heart completely disappeared. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered. Ayana looked into his eyes and smiled through her tears. "You didn't." Around them, the battle slowly came to an end. The attackers, unable to break the Apache defenses and having suffered heavy losses, finally retreated into the distant hills. The village had survived. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded across the valley, families gathered around their fires once again. The danger had passed, but something inside Taza had changed forever. For years, he had believed keeping his distance from others would protect him from heartbreak. Yet when Ayana had been in danger, he realized the truth. Loving someone always carried the risk of loss. But a life without love was a far greater emptiness than any sorrow he had ever feared. As they sat together beneath a sky filled with countless stars, Taza quietly reached for Ayana's hand. This time, he did not let go. Winter arrived quietly after the battle, covering the mountain peaks with snow and wrapping the valleys in crisp, silent mornings. The danger that had threatened the Apache people had passed, and life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. The children once again filled the camp with laughter. Hunters ventured into the forests before sunrise. Women gathered around evening fires, weaving blankets and sharing stories. The scars left by the battle remained, but they served as reminders not only of hardship, but also of courage, sacrifice, and the strength of a united people. Among those whose names were spoken with gratitude were Taza and Ayana. The elders praised Taza's leadership during the attack, saying his calm decisions had saved many lives. They also honored Ayana, whose quick thinking had protected the wounded and rescued frightened children when panic threatened to spread through the camp. Neither of them sought recognition. Whenever someone thanked Taza, he simply nodded and replied, anyone would have done the same. Whenever the women praised Ayana's bravery, she smiled gently and answered, I only helped where I was needed. Their humility only deepened the respect the people held for them. One evening, several weeks after the first snowfall, the chief invited the entire village to a gathering around the great council fire. It was a night of Thanksgiving. Families shared food, musicians played traditional songs on hand-carved flutes, and children laughed as they chased one another beneath a sky glittering with countless stars. For the first time in many years, Taza remained at the celebration instead of slipping away into the forest. He sat quietly beside Ayana, listening more than speaking, but the peaceful smile on his face did not go unnoticed. The medicine woman leaned toward the chief and whispered with a chuckle. Do you remember when everyone believed he would grow old talking only to deer? The chief laughed softly. I remember. He smiles much more now. The chief glanced toward the young couple. She brought him back to the living. Neither Taza nor Ayana heard the conversation. They were watching the children perform a playful dance near the fire. One little girl stumbled during the performance, making the others burst into laughter. Instead of crying, she laughed too. Soon the entire gathering joined in. Taza found himself laughing as well. It felt unfamiliar. And wonderful. Later that night, after the celebration had ended, Taza and Ayana walked together beneath the bright winter moon. Fresh snow sparkled across the valley, and their footsteps left quiet trails behind them. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Taza broke the silence. There is something I've wanted to ask you. Ayana looked toward him. What is it? He hesitated. The question had lived inside his heart since the day they first met. Why me? She smiled gently. You've asked that question many times without using those words. He lowered his eyes. I still don't understand. They stopped beside a frozen stream where moonlight reflected across the smooth ice like polished silver. Taza took a slow breath. You are the daughter of a respected chief. Yes. You could have married a famous warrior. I could have. A skilled horseman. She nodded. Or the son of another chief. Yes. He looked at her with complete honesty. So why choose the quiet hunter who barely knew how to speak to you? Ayana was silent for a moment. Then she smiled, not because the question amused her, but because she had been waiting for him to ask it. I should tell you a story, she said. Taza listened carefully. Before our families arranged the marriage, she began, our band visited this valley several summers ago for trading. Taza frowned slightly. I remember traders coming. You probably don't remember seeing me. He shook his head. I don't. I saw you. She looked toward the snowy trees as memories returned. Most of the young warriors spent their time competing. They raced horses. They boasted about their hunting. They argued over who was the strongest. She laughed softly. They were very determined to impress everyone. Taza couldn't help smiling. That sounds familiar. But you weren't with them. He looked surprised. You were carrying water for an elderly man whose shoulder had been injured. Taza searched his memory. I had forgotten. I hadn't. She continued. The next morning I saw you repairing a little boy's broken bow. You never asked who owned it. You simply fixed it. Taza shrugged. It needed fixing. Ayana smiled. Exactly. She stepped a little closer. Then I watched something I'll never forget. There was a frightened puppy trapped beneath a fallen tree branch. The children were too scared to help. You carefully lifted the branch, wrapped the puppy in your blanket, and carried it back to its owner. Taza looked embarrassed. It was only a puppy. No. She shook her head gently. It showed me who you were. The winter wind whispered softly through the pine trees. Ayana continued speaking. I realized something that day. The loudest men were trying to convince everyone they were strong. You never tried. You simply were. She looked directly into his eyes. I wasn't searching for the bravest hunter. I wasn't searching for the richest man. I wasn't searching for the warrior with the finest horse. Her voice became softer. I wanted someone whose kindness remained the same whether anyone was watching or not. Taza felt his throat tighten. She reached for his hand. I chose the man who believed feeding a hungry widow mattered more than receiving praise. The man who protected children before protecting his own pride. The man who treated every life, whether human or animal, with respect. She smiled warmly. I chose the man I knew I could trust with my heart. For a long moment, Taza could not speak. The cold air seemed to disappear. So many years of doubt, loneliness, and quiet guilt filled his mind. I always believed. He whispered. He stopped. Ayana waited patiently. I always believed people respected me because I was useful. She gently squeezed his hand. They respected your skill. She smiled. But I fell in love with your character. Tears gathered in Taza's eyes. He quickly looked away, embarrassed. Ayana stepped closer and gently lifted his chin. There is nothing weak about feeling. For years, Taza had carried a burden he had never shared with anyone. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I loved someone again, I would lose them. Ayana nodded. I know. So I convinced myself I didn't deserve a family. You deserve one, she said firmly. You always did. Her words settled deep within him. Not because they erased the pain of losing his parents and sister. Nothing could do that. But for the first time since that terrible day, he understood something important. The people he had lost would never have wanted grief to become the rest of his life. They would have wanted him to live. To love. To laugh again. As they stood beneath the moonlit sky, Taza wrapped his arms around Ayana. It was not a hurried embrace. It was the embrace of a man finally allowing himself to believe what he had spent years denying. Perhaps he had been worthy of love all along. He had simply needed someone patient enough to help him see it. Far above them, the stars shone brightly over the quiet valley, as if silently blessing the two hearts that had finally found their way home. The years passed as quietly as the changing seasons. Spring wildflowers continued to bloom across the valleys. Summer filled the forests with the songs of birds. Autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and each winter laid a blanket of snow over the Apache homeland before giving way once more to the warmth of spring. Time changed many things. But some things remained wonderfully constant. Every morning before sunrise, Taza still walked into the wilderness with his bow across his shoulder. His movements were slower than they had been in his youth, but his eyes remained as sharp as ever. He no longer hunted simply to prove his skill. He hunted because providing for his people had become part of who he was. And every evening waited for him. Ayana. She was always there, standing outside their lodge with the same gentle smile that had first unsettled the lonely hunter years before. No matter how difficult the day had been, seeing her erased his weariness. For the first time in his life, Taza understood what it truly meant to come home. Their lodge no longer resembled the quiet shelter where Taza had once lived alone. Colorful woven blankets covered the sleeping area. Clay pots filled with herbs lined the shelves. Brightly patterned baskets held dried berries and corn, while carefully carved wooden toys rested in one corner. Those toys belonged to their children. Their eldest son, Nantan, had inherited his father's patience. He loved following Taza through the forest, learning to identify animal tracks and listening carefully to every lesson. Their younger daughter, Tala, possessed her mother's joyful spirit. She filled the lodge with endless questions, laughter, and stories, often convincing even the quietest elders to smile. The house that had once echoed with silence was now alive with voices. Sometimes, when the children had finally fallen asleep, Taza would sit beside the fire and simply listen to the peaceful quiet. It was a different kind of silence now. Not empty. Comfortable. Complete. As the years passed, both Apache bands continued to grow closer. The peace that had begun with Taza and Ayana's marriage grew into a lasting friendship between their people. Families traded freely, celebrated together, and stood beside one another whenever hardship arose. The chief, now older and slower than before, often asked Taza to help settle disagreements among hunters. At first, Taza resisted. "I am not a leader," he would say. The chief always smiled. The best leaders rarely believe they are. Taza never sought authority, yet people trusted him because they knew he listened before speaking. When two hunters argued over hunting grounds, Taza patiently heard both sides before suggesting a fair solution. When young warriors grew eager for unnecessary conflict, he reminded them that true courage was measured by the battles a man avoided as much as the ones he fought. Even those who disagreed with him respected his judgment. Not because he demanded respect. Because he had earned it. Ayana became just as beloved. She worked beside the medicine woman for many years, learning the healing properties of plants, caring for the sick, and comforting grieving families. Young women often sought her advice before marriage. One afternoon, a shy girl asked, "How did you know Taza was the right man?" Ayana smiled knowingly. "I didn't choose the man who spoke the sweetest words." She looked across the valley, where Taza patiently helped a group of children practice with small bows. "I chose the man whose actions spoke even when he remained silent." The young woman followed her gaze. "I hope I find someone like him." Ayana laughed softly. "I hope you find someone who is truly himself." One crisp autumn evening, many years after their wedding, the entire village gathered for another harvest celebration. Children who had once learned archery from Taza were now grown warriors with families of their own. The little boy Ayana had rescued during the battle had become a respected hunter. Even the chief's grandchildren eagerly listened whenever Taza shared stories of the forest. As the celebration continued, music echoed through the valley. Families danced around the great fire while elders smiled proudly at the generations gathered before them. Taza and Ayana sat together near the edge of the celebration, watching the joyful scene. After a while, Ayana looked at him with a playful smile. "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" Taza immediately looked embarrassed. "I was hoping you had forgotten." "I never will." She laughed. "You looked at me as though someone had made a terrible mistake." Taza chuckled. "I thought they had." She tilted her head. "And what did you say?" He rubbed the back of his neck, just as he had all those years ago. "I believe my exact words were." He smiled sheepishly. "You're far too beautiful for me." Ayana burst into gentle laughter. The sound was as warm and familiar as the evening fire. "And after all these years," she asked, "do you still believe that?" Taza looked at her for a long moment. Time had placed a few silver strands in her dark hair, and gentle lines now framed the smile he loved so dearly. To him, she was more beautiful than the day they had met. He reached for her hand. "Perhaps you were always too beautiful for me," he said softly. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh." He smiled, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "But somehow." He gently squeezed her hand. "You chose me anyway." Ayanna leaned her head against his shoulder. "No, Taza." He looked at her. "I chose the man who never saw how beautiful his own heart was." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly before them. Children laughed in the distance. The stars slowly appeared one by one across the darkening sky. Taza closed his eyes and took a deep breath. There had been a time when he believed loneliness was the safest path. A time when grief had convinced him that love only led to loss. He had spent years hiding from happiness because he feared it could be taken away. Now, sitting beside the woman who had patiently mended his broken heart, he understood how wrong he had been. Love had never erased his pain. It had simply given that pain a purpose. His memories of his parents and sister no longer filled him only with sorrow. Instead, they reminded him to cherish every sunrise, every shared meal, every laugh, and every embrace with the family he had been blessed to build. He finally understood that being worthy of love was never about strength, wealth, or perfection. It was about kindness. About loyalty. About showing up for others when they needed you most. About choosing compassion, even when no one was watching. As the celebration continued around them, Taza looked at the people filling the valley with laughter. He saw friends who had become family. Children who had grown into honorable adults. A community united not by fear, but by trust. Then he looked once more at Ayanna. Years ago, he had believed she deserved someone better. Now he realized something far more important. She had never needed a perfect man. She had simply needed a good one. And every day since they met, he had tried to become exactly that. The drums echoed through the valley long into the night, carrying with them a story that would be told for generations, a story not of the greatest warrior or the richest chief, but of a quiet hunter who learned that the strongest heart is the one brave enough to accept love. Long before the first light touched the red mesas and pine-covered mountains of Apache country, a lone figure was already moving silently through the wilderness. His footsteps made almost no sound against the earth, and even the deer grazing in the valleys rarely sensed his presence until he had already passed. The people of the tribe called him Taza, a hunter whose eyes could read the land like others read stories carved into stone. A broken twig, a faint footprint in dry soil, or a feather caught on a thorn bush told him everything he needed to know. Elders often said that Taza had been born with the spirit of the eagle and the patience of the wolf. Young boys dreamed of becoming hunters like him, while experienced warriors sought his guidance before long journeys. Yet despite the respect he earned, Taza lived alone. His lodge stood at the edge of the Apache camp, where the trees grew thicker and the sounds of laughter faded with the evening wind. While other families gathered around their fires to share stories, songs, and meals, Taza usually sat by himself, repairing his bow, sharpening his arrows, or staring quietly into the dancing flames. Many believed he preferred solitude. Only a handful of tribal elders knew the real reason. Years earlier, when Taza was still a young man full of hope, tragedy had changed everything. During a season of conflict between rival groups, his family had been caught in the violence. His father, a respected warrior, had fallen defending the camp. His mother and younger sister had not survived the chaos that followed. When the smoke cleared, Taza returned from a